From the director nearly scrapping the movie while he worked on Chapter 4, to the countless actors that might replace Keanu Reeves in the lead role, here's everything you need to know about the John Wick 5 update that's driving fans insane. I'm personally breathing a sigh of relief, because Chad Stahelski almost canned the whole project during Chapter 4's production. The studio initially wanted him to shoot Chapters 4 and 5 back-to-back, which is quite common in Hollywood. It's like if you have an established franchise, somehow the studio wants to get more content out fast. Back-to-back filming can seriously reduce costs, and considering how well the first 3 chapters did, it makes sense that the studio wanted Stahelski to churn out a couple more sequels as soon as possible. The thing is, Chad's been involved in projects like this before, and he just doesn't think he's capable of such an enormous undertaking. He says he needs a bit of time between filming to get his head straight, and he uses the free time to do some research and come up with new ideas. That's why each installment in the John Wick franchise was better than the last. If you've seen Chapter 4, you'd know that there's a big problem that might make Chapter 5 impossible. Spoiler alert for those that haven't seen it yet. Well, the thing is, John Wick dies in Chapter 4. Yep, Stahelski clearly saw it as Baba Yaga's swan song, which is why he wrote the character's death into the script. You might think he's crazy for killing off his most iconic character, and you wouldn't be alone. The studio was absolutely furious with him for even suggesting it, but according to Chad, it was the only way to take the franchise up a notch. We'd already seen Wick mow through dozens of people to avenge his dog, and there's only so many times you can watch stuff like that without it getting boring, you know? Wick's story felt like it was coming to a natural conclusion, so Stahelski just rolled with it. He left the death scene open-ended at first, even shooting some extra scenes for the funeral in case he had to change it. It all started to make sense when the film was screened in front of a test audience. Audience members loved that death scene, and they weren't too happy when the alternate footage was screened. The studio realized that Chad and Keanu knew what they were doing, so they agreed to make the death permanent. Don't get too sad though. We're still gonna return to John Wick's mysterious world in a bunch of spin-offs. Ballerina's the next big release for the franchise, and it's obviously centered around the deadly dancer, played by Unity Phelan, featured in John Wick 3. Though, it looks like she won't be returning in the spin-off. Apparently, the studio wanted someone with a bit more star power for the lead role, so they decided to cast Ana de Armas, who's been climbing up the ranks in recent years, starring alongside Daniel Craig in Knives Out and No Time to Die. I'd say the studio made a great decision by hiring her, and as for our favorite assassin, I have some good news. Keanu Reeves is confirmed to appear in Ballerina, and he was even spotted in Prague back in November 2022 for filming. What's more, Ian McShane will also be returning as the New York Continental's manager, Winston Scott. There's no news about how big of a role Keanu will play in Ballerina, but considering that Scott's making a reappearance, I'm assuming it'll all tie back into the overarching saga of the franchise. We're even going to get to see Wick's adoptive sister Katia come into play. So Ballerina's very likely going to expand Baba Yaga's backstory, establishing a brand new character along the way. Don't get too excited though. John Wick's still dead, and he's only showing up in Ballerina because it takes place between Chapters 3 and 4. That's better than nothing, I guess. And the studio's planning to pump out a ton of other projects to make up for his loss. For one thing, Stahelski announced a prequel TV series about the Continental back in 2017. Lionsgate sold the streaming rights to Peacock, so we'll get a more in-depth look into the John Wick universe pretty soon. The show's official title is The Continental, from the world of John Wick. Considering its September 2023 release date, it's the next big entry into the franchise. So, we have Ballerina filling in the gaps between Chapters 3 and 4, and the Continental winding the clock back even further. Does this mean that Chapter 5's completely off the table? Look, if there's one thing that can make people change their tune, it's money. And John Wick 4 earned plenty of that at the box office, raking in a whopping $432 million worldwide. With the movie's massive success set in stone, Lionsgate finally decided to officially greenlight Chapter 5. They announced it along with tons of other projects, including a sequel to Ballerina. So there's finally some hope on the horizon for fans who can't get enough of Baba Yaga. Stahelski said that he's too burned out for another chapter. But he's also mentioned that he's willing to work on a sequel as long as it's not a cash grab. The announcement clearly said that the movie will be, an organic continuation of the storyline. And given how central Chad's innovative directing has been to the franchise's success, I seriously doubt they'll go ahead without him. Keanu's involvement seems more doubtful, though. Reeves has been pretty vocal about his commitment to the role, but bringing John Wick back after the funeral scene will be a tough sell. That's a huge problem, because I'm having a hard time seeing it work without Keanu in the lead role. The guy defined the films from the get-go. For starters, he convinced the writers to age John Wick down, because they were planning to make him 75 years old at first. Fast forward to Chapter 4, and Reeves made even more major changes, taking about half the dialogue out of the script because he preferred Wick speaking with actions rather than words. What will a John Wick film even look like without the man himself? According to Lionsgate chairman Joe Drake, Chapter 5 might be a prequel. There's always room to explore a character's backstory, and with Ballerina already doing that to some extent, I'd say that the prequel angle would be a solid choice. It'd be a great way to bring Wick back into the fold without ruining the ending to Chapter 4. Some might say Keanu's too old for a prequel, but the man doesn't seem to age, so it won't be a stretch for him to play a younger version of the character. To be fair, it's pretty easy to make the case for Wick faking his death too. We never got to see him dead in Chapter 4, and considering how the franchise is basically a love letter to the whole action genre, the stage is set for Wick's return. After all, death scene fake-outs are a time-honored tradition for action flicks. Bringing John Wick back perfectly aligns with the vibe of the series, but that's if Keanu and Chad agree to do it. Fortunately, Stahelski confirmed that they're not done with the franchise quite yet, though he wants to focus on other projects like the Ghost of Tsushima adaptation for now. I don't blame him for needing a break. He's been working on John Wick films non-stop for about 9 years as of 2023, so it makes sense for him to unwind for a bit. Chad said that he loves everything about the franchise, and Keanu certainly agrees. So they'll both be involved with future John Wick projects in some capacity. That could just mean that Keanu and Chad will just act as consultants for the spin-offs, making sure the franchise stays true to its roots. If that's the case, who could possibly step in to fill Keanu's shoes? It turns out that Chad has a massive list of actors he'd like to bring to the John Wick universe. Cillian Murphy's at the top of the list, with the Irish actor clearly showing he has what it takes to play a violent man in Peaky Blinders. He's not the only Irishman on the list either. With Colin Farrell also making the cut, Chad's hoping to bring plenty of A-list actresses in as well. He mentioned Charlize Theron and Michelle Yeoh too, and if that's not enough to make you admire the guy's vision, wait till you hear about some of his unorthodox choices. MCU and Game of Thrones fans will be overjoyed, because if Chad has his way, they might get to see Robert Downey Jr., Sean Bean, and Peter Dinklage starring in an upcoming John Wick film. Chapter 5's still in the early stages of development, but the updates we've gotten so far will make it one of the most anticipated films of the decade. So, from the phenomenal list of actors that Chad might pick for the lead role, to the way it was nearly scrapped during Chapter 4's filming, this was everything you needed to know about the latest updates for John Wick 5.